Welcome to the Indiana Basketball Weekly Show on the Grueling Truth Sports Network. Indiana Basketball Weekly is brought to you by mybookie.ag. I don't know. They are. You can use the promo code TRUTH50. We are looking for a sponsor still. And actually, Ken, we've got a couple people interested. I talked to a chiropractor today. So if anybody is interested, you can hit us up at the Grueling Truth at gmail.com. I'm your co-host for Indiana Basketball Weekly, Mike Goodpaster, and I want to welcome in Ken Sterling. How you doing, Ken?
I'm doing great, and if it means anything to the chiropractor, I don't have scoliosis, but I'm willing to give it a shot if, him trying out his wares, applying his wares against me or on me somehow sways the deal in our favor.
Well, he's listening today, so we'll see
Perfect.
how that goes. All right, Indiana and Gannon last night. We got the privilege of watching the game on Big Ten Plus. What was that like for you, Kent?
Well, I kept ruining spending the $10 not to be able to watch it. But, I'm not used to going into my pocket to watching Indiana basketball, and through Big Ten Plus, that's the only way to do it. It's $9.95 for the month. And so we do get this game and then Western Illinois and Portland State as well. But, I just think I think that's greedy, man.
Yeah.
We already pay for the Big Ten network. Give us this stuff that really nobody's going to watch but hardcore fans, especially the Olympic sports stuff. Give that for free. If you're not going to put professional announcers on the deal, let's go and make it accessible for people. The game in the first half really bugged me. I had a problem with the way Indiana played because I don't think they value the experience of playing for Indiana, or at least they looked like they didn't last night. The second half was much better, but that first half, I just don't understand what the disconnect is with Indiana basketball. And maybe it's not just Indiana basketball. Maybe it's basketball in general being played these days by 18 to 22-year-olds. But, man, do they look like they're just playing at it and not competing at it.
Well, the lack of a crowd was a little disconcerting, too, because if you put this 20, 30 years ago, the place is probably packed even for playing Gannon University. So I think overall with Indiana, the culture has changed so much in the last couple decades that this is kind of what we got right now.
And I think that what you're going to have are a bunch of kids who regret their lack of experience, whether it was playing or whether it was watching. You got to get out and do stuff. And I think people are so hooked, not to get sociological about this, but people are so hooked into their smartphone and their gaming systems and all of that stuff, or binge watching, whatever, that they just miss out on the doing. And even when they are doing and when they're watching, they got their smartphones with them then too. So they're constantly distracted from the experience that they're supposed to be immersed in. And as far as the players, you got about 130 bites at this apple. You got 130 times to trot out and represent Indiana University or whatever school you're participating, under their umbrella, and to not make the most of every single appearance and every single opportunity, I think is just a shame.
Yeah, and last night, without Al Durham, Devante Green, Rob Finney returned. And I think that's an important development for a team that is lacking in guard depth and for a player who I think is inarguably one of the program's most important players. What did you think about Finney last night in his playing time?
I thought he was okay, but this sounds like it's going to be kind of an ongoing deal. He played, 13 or 14 minutes last night, and I know Archie wanted to run him out there 3 times at 4 minutes each. But at some point, you'd really like him to be able to go 30 minutes. Because if Al Durham's got his little knee thing, which that's what Justin Smith called it last night in the post-game media availability, and Devante Green still out with a hammy, you've got Armand Franklin out at the point. And I thought Armand did a wonderful job at the point for a guy who didn't play that in high school, but really kind of adapted very well and very quickly to at least being functional in that role. You don't want to go into Big Ten play without Rob Finney being able to play 30 minutes at a crack. And so, you're kind of knocking on wood that whatever that lower abdominal thing is that he's got clears itself up and let's get going. Because without Finney, this thing we saw last year, when he got that concussion and he came back, but before he was completely kind of clear-headed, before he was, what he had been, that was a different team, and that was a stretch where they lost 12-13.
Yeah, and a guy that I think may have been the best player on the floor last night was Justin Smith, who has flashed great potential over the
Yeah.
last year or so at IU. And I think that he logged just 20 minutes. But the thing that really struck me about him was he wasn't really trying to force anything off the dribble like he has in the past.
That's true, but you know what? They were playing against Gannon, and Gannon is not going to have a Justin Smith. You know what I mean? He's 6'7" with completely unique athletic ability, off the charts, elite athletic ability, and so he should look like that against a team like Gannon, and he did. But I mean, you're right, and that's kind of the shame of a guy who's at that end of the athletic spectrum, is that we always expect a guy like that to be elite. And maybe he's just not built psychologically to be that all the time. But last night, his athleticism really showed out. He hit foul shots. He played within himself. And I like that from all the guys. You really didn't see anybody other than maybe Jerome Hunter force some things, but I thought those were good threes. They looked ugly because the result was ugly. I thought that team played within itself. And when they moved the ball effectively, I thought that offense looked like it might be really productive.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, though, is Justin Smith, I think, playing against competition like this last year would have been forcing everything to just try to go off on him. So that's what I took away from Justin Smith. The other thing is you talked to Jerome Hunter. He 0 for 5 from the field, scored just 2 points, fouled out in 17 minutes. Where does he fit in here? Because this is a guy at 6'7" a forward that they really need something from this year.
He's going to have to figure this out, right? He's going to have to get himself in the kind of physical condition where he can play and contribute. And then psychologically, I think that might be the tougher end of that kind of equation. You know, at Butler University last year, they had a guy named Jordan Tucker who became eligible at about mid-season as a transfer from Duke. And Butler went from being one team to kind of being the other with him involved. And we tend to look at that kind of thing as just addition, like you're adding Jerome Hunter. But what you're doing when you're adding Jerome Hunter, you're completely changing the chemistry and the rotation. And that may take some time to get used to for these guys as they kind of ease Jerome Hunter into being a big contributor on this team. He's definitely got the athleticism. He looked great running last night, up and down. I spent some time watching him sprint. He looked terrific. The shot was really balky, but maybe, you know what? He hadn't taken a shot that was meaningful or that's been meaningful in over a year, about a year and a half. And so this is going to be a work in progress, and he's going to have to figure some things out.
Now, Devante Anderson's a guy who played 29 minutes in the secret scrimmage. Don't tell anybody about it against Marquette. And last night, he played 31 minutes against Gannon, and he actually was finally productive. One of IU's 5 players to score in double figures. He made 2 of the team's 5 3-pointers, which is huge because that's kind of his MO coming in here last year, which he didn't show us. And I think he's a guy that if he could consistently knock down perimeter shots, he's a player with a good shot to remain in the rotation even after this team returns to full strength.
He is really going to have to hit a lot of perimeter shots to make up for his defensive liabilities.
Yeah.
On the foot, he just looks lost defensively, even against a team like Gannon. He gets caught up in the backwash of screens all the time. He's out of position, almost like it's his job. I don't mean to be cruel toward Devante Anderson. Maybe the switch will go on and he'll figure it out. But defensively, against Big Ten coaching, he is going to be an extreme liability. So, and that's why he didn't play a gob last year. So on the offensive end, if you're gonna have kind of a plus minus that's even, if you're gonna balance the scales to somehow counter those defensive liabilities, he's really gonna have to hit a lot of shots.
All right, now what do we look defensively? Because Archie Miller's known as being a defensive coach. 2 years ago, I thought the defense was big time lacking. Last year, I think it was a little bit better. With this team, do you think this team looks like they're rounding into shape for the kind of team that Archie Miller wants to have?
You know, I do. If you take away Devante, you know, you've got a guy like Jerome Hunter who's very long. you got a guy like Armand Franklin. And Armand Franklin, it was he and Trace, right? Those are the two freshmen. But then you've got Joey Brunk as a newcomer as well. I thought that Armand Franklin looked like a guy for whom the game is not too fast, even as a freshman. He looked like he knew what he was doing on both ends. I like him defensively a lot. I think he had 4 steals. And again, this is Gannon, so he can't project that out and make it sound like it's more than it is. But I thought if you put kind of Armand Franklin, Rob Finney, a motivated Justin Smith, Joey Brunk, and Trace, although the game did look a little bit too fast for Trace and he looked like he's going to be a work in progress, you put those 5 guys on the floor, I think you got a chance. And if you've got Devante Green in kind of a headspace where he's motivated to play on the defensive end, Race Thompson, I thought looked adequate defensively and maybe a little better than that. I think that this is a better defensive team than they had last year. Romeo Langford, when I watched Romeo Langford last year, I kind of thought about TJ Leaf, who's with the Indiana Pacers now, but was with UCLA. And when he played in high school and on his AAU team, he never played any defense because they needed all his energy on the offensive end. So he never learned how to play defense. And I think that was kind of Romeo. Romeo knew how to be on ball, but away from the ball, he was really not very good. He got lost a lot. And because of that, because they needed his points, I thought that Indiana kind of suffered defensively because of Romeo. And I love Romeo, but defensively, I didn't think that he was necessarily a force for good at all times. I think this team can kind of raise its game defensively. And let's face it, it's going to have to. Because offensively, you look at the talent on this team, and this is not a team with a top 100 player in college basketball. So they're going to have to out-defend, and they're going to have to out-tough.
Yeah, and I think with Armand Franklin, I think if you were to pair him and Finney up in the backcourt, I think you would have one of the best defensive backcourts in the Big Ten.
He's one of those guys that we're going to be really, really happy they recruited. I think he's a perfect Indiana/Archie Miller type basketball player. He's not a guy who's going to go to the NBA early. He's going to do whatever he's asked to do. He's going to fulfill a role, even though he was the best player in his Cathedral High School team on the northeast side of Indianapolis the last couple of years. You know what? That guy did the dirty work, and he did it willingly for Jason Delaney and his Fighting Irish program.
Now, another thing to concern most people that watched this team last year are turnovers. They had 16 in the super secret scrimmage against Marquette, and they had 14. I just like to say that, so I'm probably going to say it at least 3 more times, and maybe people out there listening can play a drinking game to it. I may even bring it up throughout the year. 14 turnovers against Gannon, so there's a little rust there. But I think when you look at this and you look at the guys like Franklin, Finney, Devante Green, the guys that will be in this roster come Tuesday night, I think that's something that I think is going to get immeasurably better than it was last year also.
Yeah, I think that this is, in the aggregate, going to be a smarter basketball team than Indiana had last year. I think that they're going to, and they mentioned this last night afterward in the media availability, having defense turn to offense. And that's what, every coach wants that. Every coach wants, the pace of play to be in their favor and to get up shots quickly because you're more likely to make shots the earlier you take them in a possession because the defense isn't set. If you can get out in transition and force the issue, that's going to be good for everybody, and that will limit turnovers. I just think these guys being as smart as they are, again, in the aggregate, you've got guys who are more experienced in Justin Smith as a junior, Devante, Deron Davis. I'm not sure what Deron has done to kind of play his way into the doghouse and not have a starting spot, but those guys have been around a lot. I don't think they're going to turn it over much. If you've got Finney healthy for the season, that's going to take care of a lot of the problems. I like their versatility, and I do like their intellect, and hopefully – they can, because let's face it, when you're a team like Indiana, you're not going to overwhelm people with your talent. So you had better gain advantages in intellect, in not making mistakes. We all know from Bob Knight, right, that victory favors the team making the fewest mistakes. So limit mistakes, do what you can to raise your intensity defensively, bring some toughness, and you can kind of be greater as a collective than the sum of your parts.
And shoot free throws.
Yeah, you got to shoot free throws. And last night they were much better about it. You got to get to the line and you got to knock them down. You can't have games like in the super secret scrimmage where they hit like 57%, or 55.8 or whatever it was. You can't have that kind of game or you're going to get beat.
Yeah, but it was a super secret scrimmage. So it's not as important. And we both got it in there once each within a minute, so that makes it even better. Actually, there's a few non-conference opponents here that could be super secret scrimmages, and nobody would know.
Yeah.
When we look at this schedule, though, I know I wasn't a big fan of it before, but I think with the injury issues they seem to be having early on, and with guys like Armand Franklin that need a lot of experience, I'm all right with the schedule right now because it plays out where they should get 6 or 7 wins fairly easily. There's no big quad, whatever they call it, wins here. South Dakota State will probably be the biggest one. But overall, I think this sets this team up for success early, which when you have a young team, I think is more important than just about anything.
Well, and they better figure out how to play 40 good minutes because teams, Western Illinois coming to Assembly Hall, or Troy coming to Assembly Hall. This is Princeton. These are huge games for those programs, and those kids are going to come in ready to compete. And if Indiana isn't ready to compete, they're going to get beat. And if you get beat in any of these November games, it is going to cost you dearly come March. And that's not good. So you've got to be disciplined. You've got to be able to compete. You've got to be tough. And I think one of the things that's going to drive that train positively or negatively to me is Archie Miller. Like Archie has got to, in a game that they, like last night's game where they beat Gannon by 30, you have got to take from the tape all the bad stuff you did, and you got to drill it into those guys that you're not going to put up with that crap, and you cannot have these guys walk off the floor or walk out in practice or after watching tape think that they invented the game of basketball because they beat Troy. They should feel like, I got to get to work and get better right now because we only beat Gannon by 30. You need that kind of psychology with these guys. Or come, early December when you're playing Florida State, you're going to play, then Arkansas a little bit later, but Notre Dame and really good teams, they are going to beat you. You've got to use these games not just to sharpen what you're going to do schematically, but to sharpen how you behave and the concentration that you bring to competing every single possession.
Yeah, and when we talk about Western Illinois, real quick, what's their nickname, Kent?
The Wild Hornets.
No, it's the Leathernecks. It's the Leathernecks. Come on.
Of course it is.
You were thinking too much about the super secret scrimmage to be able to bring that up. Last year, this is from the Western Illinois website. They went 4-12. Well, it starts off with Coach Wright and the men's team are looking to continue the success of last season. The Leathernecks went 4-12 in Summit League play and 10-21 overall. That is actually
you know what though?
says.
Like you look at last night and UIndy beat Loyola of Chicago up at the Gentile Center. I know, like Western Illinois, we can laugh, and the Leathernecks, I guess, are obviously challenged, and you should beat the living hell out of every Summit League opponent. But man, if you don't show up, games can get away from you. And if you give people hope, even people like Western Illinois, you know what? Bad things can happen. And that would be an atrocious loss.
Well,
how
about this? We talked about South Dakota State, who was a really good team last year, won a lot of games. They were in the NIT instead of the NCAA because in the first round of the Summit League, they lose 79-76 to the Leathernecks of Western Illinois, who then in the semifinals only lost by 4 points to North Dakota State, who ended up making the NCAA tournament. So this is not Gannon. These guys can play. And I would say with what we saw with the first half last night, if you play that against Western Illinois, you may even be down a few points by the time you get to halftime.
And the thing, what these games will show, and what last night's game to me showed during the first half, is that there are a lot of guys out there who can play basketball. And the difference between a guy playing at Western Illinois and a guy playing at one of the higher, like a Missouri Valley type team, like a Loyola or like a St. Louis, or although they're in the A-10, but Illinois State, the difference between those players is really almost negligible. And so you better take care of business. The thing that separates really good teams and high major teams is size and athleticism. You know, if you got guys 6'4" and under, those guys are for into all intents and purposes kind of equal. You know, unless you've got somebody who's just a freak show guy. Unless you've got like Carson Edwards, who is just insane the last couple of years. But if you've got kind of guards, those guards like Robert Finney, the difference between Robert Finney and, let's say, the point guard for Troy, I don't think is going to be a whole lot. You're not going to beat a team like Troy by 40 points just by rolling out the balls and going and playing. These guys can all play. You don't have guys who have offhand dribbling problems like we used to see in the 80s. Yeah. You know, guys who just flat couldn't play. These guys can all play. They've worked really hard. Everybody's got a trainer. And you better show up and you better pack a lunch or you get surprised. And Indiana isn't going to be a team that's going to be able to overcome November's surprises with February's successes.
No, because one loss to Western Illinois
Yep.
looks real bad. And they can't afford to do that right now. They did that enough over the last 2 years. But luckily, they didn't win enough in the Big Ten to make it matter. So it never really cost them. I don't know.
No, and you look at a game like Fort Wayne, right? We kind of laughed at Fort Wayne. We laughed when we went up there and Crean's team and got beat. You know what? You got guys like John Conchar. John Conchar can flat play. And you think, what's the matter with this guy playing with the Mastodons? See, I know their mascot, the Mastodons. And you look at them and say, well, this is a joke because we're Indiana and they're Fort Wayne. And all of a sudden you get beat like in a home-and-home series. You get beat twice. You can't have that.
Yeah, and you've got a guy by the name of Webster who averages 17 points a game who's a returner from last year. But the thing that sticks out to me here about this Western Illinois team is they seem to shoot the ball really well from the free throw line, which they got to be able to get there. So you got to play defense without fouling them. But they got 3 or 4 guys here that shoot 75% or better from the free throw line. And as a team last year, I think the returners shot like 72%. So it's not the Indiana 65%. So they've got some players here. And they've got 2 guys that scored in double figures returning. Indiana has none.
You know, and this also brings up one of the other great lessons of Bob Knight. There were some negative lessons. There were some great lessons with Knight. But one of the great ones, I think, is that you play against the game. You don't play against the opponent. You're playing against your own potential to compete. And if Indiana does that, they're going to be fine. If Indiana plays down to its competition, they're going to get in a dogfight. And if you leave a team hope for the last 5 minutes, every once in a while, you're going to get beat. And that just can't happen. You know, that's the beauty of basketball, isn't it? That it's really a test of your ability to function as a member of a collective when there are all these rewards for doing in isolation what you can do and show people how grand an athlete you are. And then it's also, you know what, no, whether we're up 30 or down 30, we're playing as hard and as well together as we can. And that's kind of the glory of the game. And that's where I think Indiana's fallen short. And this goes back a long ways. But we haven't seen an Indiana team that kind of understands that for a long, long time.
No, a long time. Kobe Webster is a guard also, which is scary. He scores 17 points a game, 5 rebounds a game, 3 assists a game. So he's a good player. He played really well. They almost upset Creighton to start the year last year. And he was 10 for 22, 24 points, hit 4 3-pointers. And Creighton's a good team at Creighton. So it looks to me like, however, they can do it. If they defend Kobe Webster, they should win the game without a problem.
And, you know, again, if they just decide from the jump that they're going to play hard and play together, it's going to be a different kind of team. And the fans who are leery about Indiana basketball and are saying, you know, when's it going to be back to what it was? That's the answer. When are you going to start playing to your potential? and to start out grit people. When that happens, the results are going to take care of themselves. And we don't have to worry about a Webster kid going off for 22 points because we're going to D up correctly and with tenacity. And then on the other end, we're going to put the ball in the bucket through great rotation of the basketball and solid shooting, which you would expect from an Indiana team.
Yeah, you expect them to be unselfish and hard-nosed defensively, and we haven't seen that in a long time. And as a long-time IU fan, since basically I was born in the late 60s, I'm a little leery. I mean, who wouldn't be a little leery after the last 20 years that we've seen?
That's exactly right. It's been a long time, really since 93 or 94, that we felt like, okay, this is a team that looks like an Indiana University team. I think that Archie's doing the right thing and building from within. We talked about that last week a little bit, getting Indiana kids who understand what playing the game is and guys who have kind of gotten to their 10,000 hours in order to develop a mastery of the mental aspects of the game, and so I think we should start reaping those rewards, but it's got to come at some point. This is year 3. We got to see some of this fruit ripen and fall from the tree and start to make us feel good about being Indiana fans. Or, you know what, though, that crowd last night at Simon Scott Assembly Hall might be the crowd you see in a couple of years for Big Ten games, and nobody wants to see that.
Yeah, but I think what I've seen, especially in the backcourt with adding Armaan Franklin with Finney, the good thing about that is even if you lose Devante Green this year, you've got that backcourt together for 2 more years together. You got Franklin for hopefully 3 more years. But when you look at that, it all starts in the backcourt college basketball. At least to me it does.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at like Michigan State in 2000 with Mateen Cleaves. They weren't necessarily the best team, but they had the best backcourt. And that is huge, and that's what makes me feel better. And Armaan Franklin, it's not because he can score points, but it's because he looks like a hard-nosed player that we saw in the 70s and 80s at IU, and the same thing with Finney.
And you've got Jerome Hunter, who, as far as athletic eligibility, is a freshman. You've got Brunk, who is a junior in eligibility, is a grad-eligible transfer from Butler. You've got Trace Jackson-Davis, who looks like he's no threat to go to the NBA immediately. Like I said, that's going to be a work in progress. The core of this team is going to be together for a long time, but it's getting older in some areas too, and that's a good thing because seniors win in the Big Ten. If you've got a team full of experienced guys, you got a chance to be special. But here's one, if they play this year like they played last year, I'm not going to accept from Archie Miller, well, these guys, I had a lot of youth, they were freshmen, and now they're going to be soft. So give these guys a couple of years, and all of a sudden we're talking about year 5 of Archie Miller before this thing kind of gets rolling and starts to be competitive. And that's not what he's being paid $3.5 million a year to get done.
No. So to you, what's a successful year? Is it 18 wins, 20 wins?
I think if they get to 21 or 22, but you know what? I'm going to start to think a little bit differently and not think about a winning record in the Big Ten. Those are results. I'm not going to worry about results. I'm going to trust that I know something about basketball and that I'm going to recognize kind of an evolution toward a tougher brand of basketball.
Yeah, the process.
And as long as I see that kind of develop some gravity and some momentum, I'm going to feel better about Indiana. And then because of that process, I think wins will come. But I think that, what's Vegas got him at? Like 17, the over-under in Vegas for wins for Indiana, which I think is preposterous. So they won more than that last year, and they're going to be a better team this year, at least in theory. We're going to find out pretty quick. These November games, I think, are going to kind of tell us what to expect moving forward. But this, I'm going to say that. But if you want to pin me down to a result, I'd say 22 wins. If they win 22, that's a real step in the right direction because I think they've got the talent to win 19 or 20. And if they kind of go +2 to their talent, then I feel like they're doing the right stuff. And that Archie Miller all of a sudden looks like a guy who's causing success rather than kind of pacifying student athletes that he's afraid to coach.
Yeah, I agree with you because when I look at this schedule, I think they have the talent to be somewhere between 18 and 20. So
Yeah.
anything above 20 tells me that the coaching is definitely going in the right direction.
And we got to see that.
Yeah.
There's some real questions about whether that's coming to pass. And it does look like one thing that I'd like to see, one adjustment I'd like to see Archie Miller make is if a guy isn't playing worth a damn and looks like he's just jogging up and down the court, get his ass out of the bench and put somebody in there and reward effort. And I don't care at what level the kid is athletically, get guys out there who are willing to do what's necessary to kind of grind a little bit and show some tenacity and show some toughness. I'm tired of watching guys do that and play for 8 minutes at a stretch. I don't think it sends the right message, and I think it's poor leadership. So I want that to end. If I had one wish for Archie Miller right now, it would be that. And like I said, I'm very positive about him from a recruiting standpoint. I think he's recruiting the right guys, and he's building that Indiana brand within the state of Indiana so the best players in Indiana want to show up on campus, and they want to be a part of this thing rolling in the right direction. So there are areas where I'm real positive, but I'm tired of watching Archie Miller yell at guys while they continue to play poorly.
Yeah. I mean, 1984 at Illinois, all I'll say.
Yeah, right.
You know?
Absolutely.
And then a couple weeks later, they're beating Michael Jordan in North Carolina in the Sweet 16.
And what I loved about that, too, and again, I'm going to become this is a little more cultural than basketball-wise, but I think, like I was a student at Indiana in 1984, and that was a great lesson. Like, that was a great leadership lesson for every kid on that campus who was paying attention to Indiana basketball. It was like, oh, this is how you get the best out of guys. You know, if you're managing a department or you're a business owner and you got guys who are just showing up, you know what? Move on, because those guys are going to drag you down. And if you allow that to become your culture, that is going to become your culture. And that's not the way things work in business or in sport.
That was one of my favorite IU years. The Virginia game still bothers the hell out of me, though.
And don't bring it up with Dan Dockage.
Yeah.
Dan will go into, Dan will turn dead-eyed and start to think about how he can, cause tumult and chaos.
Yeah, 52-48. It was crushing for me as a freshman in high school because I thought, man, they beat Michael Jordan in North Carolina. They're going to go to the Final Four. They're going to play Houston. And then Knight, being the greatest coach that ever walked the face of the earth, in that week would figure out a way to stop Hakeem Olajuwon. And then we play Patrick Ewing and John Thompson.
Oh, boy.
And, that would have ended badly, by the way. Because
the train was coming off the rails.
That 84 Georgetown team, I think, was the best defensive team I've ever seen. And since I'm an IU fan, my second favorite team is whoever plays Kentucky. And what they did in the second half to Kentucky in that NCAA Final Four was one of the greatest things I've ever seen. I remember using my rotary phone to call every one of my friends that was a Kentucky fan to ask them if it's true that they really hadn't scored a point in 14 minutes.
So you think that 84 team, they wouldn't have won the matchup between Uwe Blop and Hakeem Olajuwon? That wouldn't have gone our way?
Actually, I think with a week to prepare against Guy Lewis, I actually think IU would have had a shot in that game.
Isn't that funny how and that's absolutely true, and people who didn't live through it don't understand what that means. But if Bob Knight, like if his team played Saturday and he didn't have another game till Thursday, you could bet, dollars to donuts that Indiana was going to get it done because he was going to find a way to isolate a matchup or grind a team into the dirt and prepare his guys to win that matchup. Maybe in 10 times if they had played every other day, Indiana might have lost 7. But with 5 days to prepare, Bob Knight didn't lose to a lot of people.
Yeah, and I mean, really, that North Carolina team, I think, was more talented than the Houston team.
Yeah.
That Houston team, people forget, had lost Clyde Drexler, Larry Mishaw. They lost a few of those guys from the years before. And you were running with Alvin Franklin, who was a sophomore point guard, was really good. Who was the other guard? Was it Reed Geddes?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
wow,
so
great pull.
I don't think Reed Geddes could have handled Steve Alford. Now, I don't think Dan Dockage could have handled Alvin Franklin. but it's a kind
It
of a
handled
push.
Michael Jordan.
Michael Jordan was sick and only played 20 minutes because he got in foul trouble. So I always want to tweet to Dan, look at the minutes he played. He got in foul trouble, and then he fouled out with like 6 minutes left because Dean Smith brought him back in the game too soon. But we'll let Dan have that one day because it was – and the thing that was really something is I live in southeastern Indiana, so all our local media comes from Cincinnati. So we got to watch the Indiana-North Carolina game, but it was on tape delayed. It was like the 11:30 Thursday night game, and I remember I'm also a big Xavier fan, and Xavier played Michigan in the NIT Elite Eight or Final Eight quarterfinal game. I remember watching that and then not watching any news or anything, and then me and my buddy stayed up late to watch Indiana play North Carolina, and then they played Virginia 2 days later.
Yeah, there you go. That was the end of that Cinderella story.
Yeah. Was that who was it? Olden Polynice? Was he on that team?
For Virginia, I think he was.
Yeah, and Jim Carlisle? Rick Carlisle. Was it Rick Carlisle on that team?
Yeah, Rick Carlisle. Right.
But the guy who made that team go, as we talked about before, point guards was Othell Wilson.
Yep.
Who was really good. But
that was a terrific team, and that was a great NCAA tournament. That was a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah, and if you remember, Virginia took Houston to overtime in the Final Four, I think. They lost to them like 49-47, and it's really scary that I could remember all this stuff, but I can't remember anything after 1990. When it comes to anything. I think it's because I've always been an IU fan, a Reds fan, and a Bengals fan, and really nothing good's happened since 1990.
That's exactly. Yeah, the last quarter century has been pretty dim for you. There's no doubt about that.
Oh, yeah, the first 25 years of my life, I had teams going to Super Bowls, winning 3 NCAA championships, 3 World Series, and crickets since then.
That when I was in high school in 1980, New Albany goes to the state championship game. They had been undefeated in 80. Louisville wins the NCAA tournament. Indiana wins in 81. I thought, well, this is the greatest thing ever. I'm never going to root for a team that loses.
80
and then
New
all
Albany,
of a sudden,
they're the ones that lost to Broad Ripple, right? On a half-court shot? Yeah.
Well, Broad Ripple won the morning game against Marion.
Yeah,
when Stacey Turan hit like a 60-footer. And then in the night game, Broad Ripple beat New Albany and broke an entire town's heart.
Oh, I remember that was such a big deal back then with one-class basketball. I would have been like 12 years old, but we had a lighted basketball court in my backyard. And, I mean, all of us would listen to the game and shoot basketball while we listened to the game, and nobody cared who won between New Albany and Broad Ripple. But it just seemed like something that you had to do.
And that morning game between Andrean, speaking to Dan Dockich, you had Dockich on Andrean and New Albany. And New Albany had like a 24-point lead at one point early in the second half. And then Dan went off. And they had a kid at the line with no time remaining. Andrean down 1. And he was shooting 2 foul shots. If he makes them both, they win and go to the state finals. And what he did, he missed both. And both shots must have hit the rim, 6 times. They rattled in and out, and the poor kid's kind of a pariah.
So where did Dan dispose of his body at?
That's one of the great mysteries of Lake County basketball.
The missing kid. All right, we're going to go ahead, I guess, wrap it up. We want to just come back next Wednesday and look back at the first game, hopefully a win over the Western Illinois Leathernecks.
Perfect. Yeah, it better be. If it isn't, I don't. This podcast is going to have to go about 3 hours, and we're going to have to call in a psychiatrist to help talk us off a ledge.
Well, this is the thing. I'll bring it up to people now. At 5 o'clock, I'm doing Cincinnati Bengals Weekly Show with Joe Kelly. We could just use the psychiatrist we have for that show.
It's perfect. Get kind of a bulk rate for the guy.
Yeah, because also Indiana Football Weekly tonight with me and Cole Hanna, we were expecting to have to use the psychiatrist, but we haven't had to.
Well, you know what? Everything's roses now, right? And they're going to beat Northwestern. But then they got a bye week, and then it gets a little bit tough with Penn State, Michigan, and Purdue. We'll see what happens.
Well, we ought to do this. Heading into the Penn State game, you ought to come join me and Cole for the Indiana Football Show.
Happy to. That'd be fun.
All right, guys. You want to tell people where they can find you, Kent?
Oh, it's all Kent Sterling all the time. Breakfast with Kent on Facebook Live at 8 in the morning. And then on Periscope, Breakfast with Kent at about 8:15. And so that, since our podcast last week, traffic numbers for Breakfast with Kent are through the roof. So thanks to everybody who's come over and given us a listen.
All right. And I want to thank everybody that listened last week because our numbers were way more than we expected. So I appreciate
very
everybody.
Nice of people.
And make sure that you share this Indiana basketball podcast wherever you can. And thanks again. We will be back at 3 o'clock next Wednesday live to talk a little Indiana basketball. Maybe we'll tweet out a phone number where you can call in and ask questions or make comments to me and Kent. Nice comments, of course. No bad comments. It's Kent, not Dan Dockett. So, oh, heck, Dan will just be happy because we've mentioned him like 27 times on the show today.
And all positively.
Yeah. But, all right, guys, we're going to wrap it up. Remember, you can hear all of our shows on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, over 300 different outlets. Just Google us. You'll find us. So, for Kent Sterling, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.